So welcome everyone to this TRaCE McGill event featuring PhD graduates from the Faculty of Medicine. My name is Michel and I'm the manager of the TRaCE project, along with Chantal Taubet here present. Thank you for being here, Chantal. First of all, I want to remind you that this event is being recorded, so it may become available for students who were unable to attend. So please feel free to turn off your camera and or change your screen name if you prefer. You are welcome to ask questions in the chat as we go along, and our host will gladly take note of them during our open discussion later on. We've already received many questions via registration. Thank you very much. And so since there are many of you, we might not get a chance to ask your specific questions, but you are welcome to connect with our panelists using our TRaCE website. So if you go to our TRaCE website and go to the specific profile of one of our panelists, you can connect with them through this the connect button. So please feel free to do so if we are unable to address your question here today. So we're really glad to have you with us. Thank you for registering. And it is my pleasure to introduce to you Professor Paul Yakinen. Professor Paul Yakinen is the Tomlinson Professor of Shakespeare Studies here at McGill, and he's also the driving force behind the TRaCE project, and he has been for several years now, and he's a true pioneer in the field of PhD tracking and thinking about the future of the PhD. So thank you, Paul, for being with us today.
Thank you very much, Mary-Claude. And thank you, Chantal Taubet, who has also been doing all of the hard work. It's Mary-Claude and Chantal Taubet and the student researchers like Renzo, who is your host today, who are doing the real work on the TRaCE project. The TRaCE project is tracking more than 5,000 PhD graduates from across all the faculties at McGill, collecting data about them, the reports on the website. We also tell the stories, going up to 200 of the graduates, and we're also building a community, a mentoring community where grads can connect with students and help them see the multiple career horizon and pathways that are open to them. So I want to thank Renzo Calderon and Yosa, who is going to be your host. I want to thank the 4 guests today, the PhD graduates who've come back virtually to McGill University to share their experience with us. So without any further ado, let me pass things over to Renzo.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for joining us. I'm really excited to learn more about all your experiences and be able to share with our great panelists. So the way it's going to go, I will ask some questions to the panelists, and each of them will have the opportunity to answer. It will take around 30 to 40 minutes, and then we will open more for discussion. So the first question to start right away is the main reason. Why would you say, what motivated you to start your PhD? And I will, but before that, please introduce yourself and then answer the question. First, we will start with Mark Bazett.
Hi, thank you. Excited to be here, excited to be back talking to some old McGill people. It's always nice to talk to people from obviously a very important time in all of our lives. So I'm Mark Bazett. I'm a preclinical drug developer. That's really my focus. I work for a company called Bold Therapeutics, where I'm in charge of taking the preclinical understanding of our lead products and really driving them into what will be the clinical trials. So I straddle that idea between the basic science and really clinical trials. I've been working in biotech companies. This is my 3rd biotech company since I left my PhD, which I did in human genetics in 2015. So I've been in the industry for about 6 years now. So what was the actual question I was meant to be answering? I was just, my apologies.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. So what motivated you actually to do your PhD?
I think that's a really interesting, question, because I started off, I think what many people do is you don't really know what you're doing during your undergraduate. And I came out to McGill primarily because I thought McGill would be a fun city to do a cooperative education program in. So I was doing my undergrad at the University of Victoria, came out to McGill for a summer co-op term when I was working with Dr. Christina Haston on some mouse models of cystic fibrosis. And it kind of, one thing led into the other, and I really liked the science. I'd never done, actual laboratory science before I did my PhD. And that's what kind of got me started down that path of the PhD. And one thing snowballed, the project got bigger and bigger, and it transitioned into a master's. And we got some good data, and there was a really clear and really nice PhD program that kind of fell out of the master's program. So I got it primarily because I was working in the lab, really liked the science, worked well with my supervisor, really liked the different people, made some really good friends in those early years that kind of drove me to continue doing my PhD. So that was kind of my main purpose behind doing the PhD. And, retrospectively, it was great, and I really enjoyed the time.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Then we pass to Laura Jones. Can you give us a brief intro of yourself and then why you did your PhD?
Perfect. Well, hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here virtually. So my position is lead clinical specialist at a startup called Moleculite. So my job right now really focuses on training clinicians on how to use our medical device. But the great thing about the startup is you get your hands in a whole bunch of pies. So I also liaison a lot with our sales force, our development team, our clinical trials team, our marketing team, and our science communications team. So I can really bring both the clinical and the basic science information from my PhD and those skills when I'm dealing with customers and clinicians. Why I did a PhD, I think similar to Mark, the end of my undergrad, I didn't really know what it was I wanted to do. I had done a co-op program at the University of Ottawa and really found that I enjoyed working in the lab. So I thought perhaps I'd do a master's. My supervisor, Dr. William Muller in the Department of Biochemistry, had an interesting breast cancer mouse model study program. Started there as my master's, enjoyed the lab, enjoyed the work, and kind of really just wanted to finish asking my questions, which were taking longer than the 2 years master's. So I stayed for a PhD to kind of see that through and learned a lot along the way.
Awesome. Thank you very much for sharing that. And then we go with Catie Lichten.
Sure, hi. So I'm also quite happy to be here. I'm joining from the UK, and it's really nice to hear all these Canadian accents, which I never get to hear anymore. So I finished my PhD in 2012 in Department of Physiology, and I now work as a scientific writer at the University of Oxford in the UK. And I work in the Department of Chemistry, although the groups that I work with do much more biophysics type work. Basically what my job, the main sort of focus of my job is being involved in all the different steps of bringing ideas through and developing them into polished, submitted funding proposals. So most of what I do relates to reviewing, writing, editing, discussing ideas about funding proposals. There's an element of sort of coordination and project management with that as well, making sure all the bits come together and the deadline is met. And I also do a little bit of working on manuscripts, giving some feedback to students, that kind of thing. So I like it because I've got a really nice overview. I work with 3 different groups, and I've got a really nice overview, and also with a startup company that has spun out from one of the groups. I have a really nice overview of the science that everyone's doing, but I don't really get down into the nitty-gritty details. I don't have to troubleshoot experiments in the lab or debug code or any of that kind of stuff. I get to just sort of think about the ideas and what it means and then move on to the next thing, which really suits me. So why I did a PhD. So in my undergrad, I did maths. In my undergrad, I had quite a meandering path. Math, I can say that now with this audience. So I did math. I did a few different undergraduate projects during my studies, and I found that I really liked doing research. And one of those was an independent study with the supervisor who then became my PhD supervisor, and I got along with him. It was in Montreal. I was enjoying my time in Montreal. I was really interested in this project, which was about seeing sort of how you could use math to better understand biology, and I really liked the idea of that kind of application. And so it just seemed like a nice way to carry on with something that I was interested in.
Thank you very much. And then we go with Michel.
Thank you, everyone. It's good to be back to McGill. I did my PhD in 2008 with Professor Mark Weinberg. I currently work as a senior clinical reviewer with Health Canada, and I have about 11 years of experience working at Health Canada, and I've been involved in the evaluation of approval of veterinary drugs, human drugs, and disinfectants. So I've had different opportunities to work within Health Canada, most particularly recently as I was unit head for the disinfectants unit and the acting manager there, where we have been involved in the approval of all the disinfectants that are being used currently in Canada during the COVID pandemic. Before joining Health Canada or before coming to Canada, I worked at the World Health Organization collaborative laboratory at Antwerp in Belgium. It was a World Health collaborative center for HIV diagnostics. So my background is really on virology. And so when I had my undergraduate back in Africa, and Cameroon in particular, I went to do my master's in Belgium and work at the Institute of Tropical Medicine. So while in Canada, in Belgium, Canada was really one of my favorite destinations for some reason. I liked Canada, so I applied to immigrate to Canada. So I wrote to so many professors in Canada trying to look for options for a PhD. And through some support from my mentors, I got in touch with late Professor Mark Weinberg at the Jewish General Hospital, who gracefully accepted me in his lab to work as in this laboratory. So I worked as a technician for a year in this laboratory. At that time, we were working with the Quebec HIV Provincial Genotyping Project. So working in that project gave me already advantages because I was already working in the lab. And so when I switched to become a PhD student sometime later in 2005, I had already had experience working with the techniques in the lab. So it was a very good switch to starting my PhD. And so the objective of doing my PhD was mostly because I always liked infectious diseases. I always liked growing up in Africa. There were many other things that went on, but HIV virology was one of the things that I was very interested in. And so I was glad to be able to have that opportunity to work with Mark Weinberg at the Jewish General Hospital and to do the PhD program at McGill.
Awesome, thank you very much. Really, really interesting stories. Now, one of the questions that was often asked by the participants was in terms of the timeline. Like when during your PhD you start this preparedness or you start looking for what was going to come next? And if you can tell us about this transition of leaving the PhD and started with the job search or what comes next. Mark, please.
Of course. So I'll start with kind of what I did and then kind of what I would think would be maybe a more optimal path. So I think it depends, when people want to leave to go to industry. I think there's that postdoc versus just finishing your PhD. I was lucky and I transitioned right out of my PhD, but it wasn't actually my original plan. I was originally planning to do, the standard, go do a postdoc in the States for a couple of years and then kind of figure out what I wanted to do with my life. But there just happened to be a job in my hometown, in my area. So it was kind of the only industry I applied for. And it was basically right at the end of my PhD. So literally it was like 3 days after my defense, which is not the solution. That's not what you should be doing. You need to think a little bit earlier in your line. You're definitely in your last year. You can be starting to think about your kind of post plans, your job applications, where you want to be going. But I would go even a little bit earlier than that. Think about what you want to do in after your PhD. So if you want to be going, maybe you're a basic scientist, but you're really interested in clinical research, try to bring some of that in earlier into your PhD based on kind of where you're thinking you want to leave to. So, you don't need to be applying for jobs 3 years before you're done your PhD or anything like that, but definitely you should be thinking today, I want to go into clinical research. Okay, so how do I get some of that experience? Or I'm really interested in the manufacturing of biologics. Okay, maybe I could bring some of that into my PhD. So I would start as early as you can to start thinking about what that plan, actually putting, concrete, sending out applications, all that kind of stuff. I think that's probably more, in the last year. The other comment I would say is, there's the other idea is, do you do your PhD and then a postdoc, or do you go directly into industry right out of your PhD or into a career? I did it without doing the postdoc. I'd be curious to hear what the other panelists think. Generally, if you're going to make a transition out of academia, make that transition. Don't keep waiting. Don't keep doing 2 tons of work in academia. Make that transition when you can, which is often at the end. So those are some comments, but I'm curious what the other panelists think on those.
Sure. Thank you very much, Laura.
So I agree very much with Mark. I also didn't do the most optimal thing. So I didn't mention, but I graduated just in 2018. So this is still very fresh in my mind. But I didn't really know what I wanted to do until right up to the end. I knew what I didn't want to do, and I didn't want to do a postdoc. So I made that decision maybe a year, 2 years before the end. And so my recommendation is, even from right when you start your PhD, you should start thinking about what you want to do after. And maybe that's going to change, and that's totally fine. But I didn't think about anything past the PhD until way too late in my PhD. So that's my big piece of advice. For me, I actually didn't apply to any jobs until after I defended. I was very lucky, and the job I got kind of fell in my lap almost. That doesn't happen to a lot of people. So I would say, start thinking early, unlike me, and maybe start sending out applications in the last 3 months, 6 months, right when you can see the finish line, have a good idea of when you're going to be done. And I think that'll help a lot. Yeah, but whether or not you do a postdoc, that's another good point. I think just really thinking about what you want to do like early is very helpful, because I had no idea what I wanted to do. And then I was graduating, and my boss he was going to offer me to stay and work for another 6 months, years in the lab. So I had a job, but not everyone's as lucky. So that's my advice.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Catie?
Yeah. So I think for me, I had a long PhD. It was about 7 years, and I would say from maybe year 2, I can already remember thinking about different things I wanted to do, and partly that was because I knew I had no interest in becoming a PI. That was always clear to me from the start, I think. And so I thought about different things over time. I thought, oh, maybe I'd be interested in running a microscopy facility. That seemed like something kind of interesting. I thought I ended up, before I started my current job, I worked in research, in policy research. And I thought that policy was an area that had started interesting me back when I was, in the early stages of my PhD, actually. And so I was always thinking about other things I could do. And I did quite a lot of writing sort of during my whole PhD. I looked at sort of any kind of that, it's something I discovered that I enjoyed and that I was interested in. And so I was looking around for opportunities to write, from very early on, and to take additional courses and get training and feedback from people and that kind of thing. So that said, I wouldn't say that then I'd had some sort of an optimal path as a result from that. I don't know that I made the best decisions or anything, certainly, but definitely I was thinking about it, and I was attending events like this as well when they came up from pretty early on.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Michel?
Yes, for me, my pathway was kind of different. I originally, when I started, I didn't really make a decision whether I was going to do a postdoc. I was open to all options, whether to work in industry or even academia was part of it. So I actually, I advise students that you have to make a decision what you want to do. It might not be just one particular thing, it might be 2. but you start early applying. For example, if you would like to work in the public service, if working in Health Canada or any of the government offices is part of your plan, I would advise you to start applying at least 1 year in advance, or almost even 2 years, because the recruitment process is quite long. But in September, there's always a post-secondary recruitment advertised by the public service. Every September that's done. So that's the best time you can actually send in your application. And that's how I came in. I used that method to apply. And there are some exams you have to write. So the process takes almost a year. So, but I was lucky to have applied around a year before I finished my PhD. So the day I was actually defending, I was close to having the job. And I actually had a postdoc fellowship, a CISO postdoctoral fellowship, which at that time I had to make a decision whether to pick up the postdoc or to work in the public service. I think I'm happy that I chose to work in the public service. My situation was kind of a bit different. I started my family while doing my PhD, so we had 3 kids born while I was doing my PhD, so it was kind of different. So after that, looking for a job, it was kind of looking at stability, looking at so the public service also provided that fair work balance. But on the other hand, there's options also, because now working in the public service, I work in different areas. But with the COVID pandemic coming in, they needed people to work as a virologist. My importance became even more relevant. So I was taken out to lead the disinfectant unit that had issues to do with the viruses that were being. You have to ensure that the virus, the disinfectants are effective against the COVID-19, the SARS-CoV virus that causes the COVID-19. So, so even if you move to you don't follow the academia, as not doing postdoc, you can still write reviews. You can still, like now, I still write some papers on antimicrobial resistance. It still keeps you in the field, still keeps you relevant. Thank you.
So yeah, very, very important to take into account. And kind of related to that, there were many questions in terms if you feel like there was this time where you decided not to go to academia, was this moment of enlightening where you say, okay, this is not for me and I want to go to industry. I don't know if you can talk a bit about that. Mark?
I didn't. Mine was I just got the job, and so I didn't really have a decision point. I think retrospectively looking back, I made the right decision. And I'm super happy, and I'm really glad I moved into industry. I didn't have this. I had no idea what I was doing, to be honest, and I think that's a lot of people are feeling that. It sounds like all of us, we've got these nice paths, but at the time we were just as naive about what we wanted. I didn't even know what drug development was. Like, it was just completely kind of naive. So don't feel worried if you don't have this exact plan right now, because I definitely didn't. And retrospectively, I've been really happy. So I didn't have an exact enlightenment moment or anything like that. That it was like it has to be industry versus academia. But retrospectively, I've been very happy.
Laura?
So I'll echo that of not knowing what I was doing. But for me, at least, I did have kind of a realization, I would say maybe about a year before I graduated, maybe a little bit earlier, that I wasn't happy in what I was doing. I was a little bit burned out. I was sick of the bench. I was getting more joy out of TAing, out of my extracurriculars, out of writing, than I was lab work. And so I couldn't see myself doing a 5-year postdoc, doing the same sort of thing. So I did have a little bit of that realization. When I graduated, I also had that time where I'm like, oh crap, I'm not good, like I don't have training to do anything but a postdoc. Maybe I'll just go do that because I was scared of getting into industry. And so in hindsight, I'm really happy that I didn't kind of bow to that pressure, because again, I don't think I would have been happy. One thing I should mention is while I'm the lead clinical specialist now, it's not the job I got hired for out of my PhD. I took a 4-month contract at the same company I work with now, doing preclinical animal testing, microbiological stuff, testing with the device. it was not what I wanted to do. I didn't want to be at the bench, but I was like, I'll take the job. It was a short contract. I got to move to Toronto. And so maybe that was kind of the thing is, again, I didn't know what I was going to do. So I took something and it worked out really well. I fit well with the company. They promoted me. They moved me over to the department I wanted to be in more so. So yeah, I guess I didn't really have a path, but it's all kind of worked out. So.
Cool. Thank you. Catie?
Yeah, so I think, so I left academia. This is my third job since my PhD. So my other two were outside academia, and I suppose I've come back in fact, now. But yeah, as I said, I never really had the plan to go on the sort of traditional PI route. But I think what happened was that I really tried to do other things alongside my PhD and have some other experiences. And sort of like what Laura was saying, at a certain point, I realized that there were these other things that I was really enjoying and that I found, like this is something that makes sense for me to do. Whereas the work I was doing in my PhD, I was getting through it, but I didn't have that same kind of connection to it.
Yeah, Michel?
Yes, for me, I think it was really interesting that if you look, most of us, we didn't really make a decision. We had ideas, but we are not exactly where you are. You have different ideas, but it's good to be flexible. So I think when I moved into the government, I was not really, I was hired as a regulatory affairs officer. Sometimes there are some job titles that you don't even know about when you are at university. I never knew about what is a drug evaluator. I didn't know what was whether the government hires reviewers. So sometimes if you don't know those titles like regulatory affairs officer, clinical reviewer, you not even know that those jobs exist. And those are similar experiences I've had with other people who joined government and who were postdocs also before. They never knew that those jobs even existed. So, for example, I worked as a veterinary drug evaluator before. I was never a veterinarian. So, but I did some 5 years there and I had some experience working there. So now I moved, now I'm working with the non-prescription drugs. So all the Tylenol, you see the Advil. Our group actually does all the plain language labeling where we do the preclinical. So when I see Mark and Laura, they're doing that in the clinic, the other side. So when they submit those drugs, we are the ones that look at them. So I've not worked with the drugs that I had worked in the lab before, like the HIV drugs, but in the government is very wide. There's options that you can navigate to different areas. In fact, when I came in, there was the lab, the HIV labs that were in Ottawa. They were ready to offer me an option, but they were moving to Winnipeg, and at that time it wasn't possible for us to move to Winnipeg. So I could have been in that lab still doing what if I wanted to stay in the lab. So there are options that if you move, you can always navigate your way through.
Awesome, thank you very much. And now one of the questions from the registration. If you were asked by your company to look at profiles or CVs of applicants for an entry position, what would you look for primarily? And how might one of these candidates stand out? Mark?
So I can comment. We're a small company. So our company is currently about 8 people or 10 people, something like that size. So we're not looking for super specialists. So when I review, especially PhD levels, you need to have the major things. You need to have, you got a couple publications and you've done some good science. What I'm looking for is usually some of those more softer skills, things like flexibility. That is huge in small biotech. Being able to, do a little bit of this and then a little bit of that, very, very important. So to me, that's something that stands out. Things that are more than just, I did a whole bunch of lab work and I did it really well. You want to have something beyond that. Maybe you did an industry partnership with part of your PhD project, or you have a bunch of collaborations or something else that you're bringing in, or maybe you did some writing courses or something some of the other panelists talked about. So things that are more than just your science. at least in small biotech, I'm looking for someone who's more than just a specialist, someone who's can go a little bit beyond their kind of comfort zone. So those are some of the things that I'm looking for when I see resumes come across my desk.
Awesome. Malor?
I'd agree with that too. So I'm also at a small startup, a little bit bigger than Mark's. I think we're like close to 30 now, but we were closer to 15 when I started. So it's been huge expansion. And really it is flexibility. We're not looking for this one person who has this, all this knowledge about this one tiny thing. In my startup, at least, it's really all hands on deck. You have to be very flexible. You have to be willing. You can't have much of an ego either. You're going to be asked to do stuff that is not a PhD level. I was doing technician work and happy to do it when I started because someone had to do it. And if they hire a technician, they're not going to hire me. So the soft skills, being able to communicate, that's really big. On the resume, I'd like to see that you've done something other than just the PhD, whether that's, volunteer work, student committees, something that'll show that you have broader interests than just whatever your PhD was. And then of course, if I'm hiring a clinical specialist, certain credentials. So when I hire for my team, we hire nurses and PTs that work underneath me. So, for that, you have to have that clinical background. So of course, whatever they're asking for, you have to have it, and then the soft skills around it.
So for me, it's a little bit tricky because I think what I do is a bit, it's a bit removed from sort of standard, what the direction you'd go with standard science PhD training. But I would say for the 3 roles that I've had, the main thing would be certainly, if you want to get into something related to writing or editing or something, you need to demonstrate that you have those skills, and you're not going to be able to do that just by, if you're asked to submit a writing sample with your proposal, with your application, that shouldn't just be the abstract from your thesis or something. It should be something beyond, showing that you can write in other ways beyond just that sort of standard technical writing. So I think it's that, but I think it's also, you should show that you have an awareness of what that role might be looking for, so that you haven't just listed on your CV, what are your skills? Like, I'm good at, all these different lab things, and I can use this scientific computing software or something. You need to be highlighting things about, your communication or, extracurricular activities you've done or something that show that you are aware that in the role, you'll be expected to have skills beyond just, basic lab skills and technical analysis abilities, that kind of thing.
And actually, Catie, a follow-up question that is coming from the chat. Are scientific writers frequently hired by universities, or are there generally more opportunities in non-academic settings?
That's a tough one. I don't know. I think there's like one other person I found at the University of Oxford who has the same job title as I do. Because the thing is, the situation might be similar in Canada, but basically there isn't the kind of funding available to hire people like us, because you can't pay us through a grant. So you need to have some other source of funding to make it possible. So there are some research centers that have that kind of funding. And I know a few other people at other institutions who do jobs like mine. And it's possible because they have this kind of more flexible money that can be drawn on. So yeah, so there are a few jobs, but I wouldn't say, it's not like this big area that you can aim for, and there'll definitely be loads of opportunities. They also might not all come with the same label. There might be people doing things kind of like similar to what I do, but with a different mix of other responsibilities. So yeah. So, but that said, there are, I think there are sort of jobs that involve similar skills. So medical writing, for instance, I haven't done that. I don't know that much about it, but I think it's the kind of thing that someone, if you had interests like mine, that might be something that you'd think about. There's also science communication. So working in communications teams for universities or for funders, that kind of thing. So there are definitely things out there. Working at a university, maybe not the most common position.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Now, Michel.
Yes, for me, it's if in the public service is kind of more standard, the type of the applications. So the application forms on the government website, you will see a lot of, it's kind of standard. They ask for education qualification, they ask for the essential qualifications, and they ask for something like they call the assets. So technically your PhD is going to likely be an asset qualification because most of the jobs that are there are mostly, the minimum is the undergraduate and master's degree. So except for some positions that are, let me say, for a research scientist, where they require a PhD, the PhD is normally an asset. So the most important thing in those applications is to make sure you answer the questions the way they ask, because the people who are sometimes looking at the initial application, they are not scientists, they are human resource people. When they ask you, do you have experience in this? You have to just say, you have to show where, when, and how you had that experience. For example, if you have worked in the lab, just writing that you have done published papers, that's good, that you have done review. But if there's a position for, say, a drug evaluator or another position for scientific evaluator, you just the fact that you have published some papers or you have done some reviews, even if your professor had given you some review for some journal, those also help. So if you identify all those things in your applications, you ensure that you are screened in, because the steps are quite long. You have to go through a screening process. You have to go through a step of exams and before interviews. So it's good that in your application you take care of each of those items to ensure that you are screened in. So it's kind of, if we hardly do a lot of non-advertised processes. Although during COVID, we have had to do some of those where you actually see some positions being advertised that you can advertise, you can hire somebody not using those pools, but you can hire using other methods. But it's mostly during the COVID, there have been like a lot of openings where people were needed. And so they had to use all means to get people into support. So you just have to make sure that your application has it's always a question and answer section. I mean, I'm talking about the public service, always a question and answer section where they will ask you questions, and you don't want to just write, I have experience in this. You have to write where, when, and how you did that. That's the key in all those questions.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of more direct part. Yeah.
Yes.
So thank you very much. And now, just to remind all our assistants that we're opening the mic. If you have any question, please leave it in the chat. Some questions are coming right now. One of the question is, what kind of salary can you expect when emerging industry with a PhD? Mark, please.
That's a hard question. It's hugely variable, and it really depends on your industry. You know, if you're going to a big pharma, you can go to your PhD. You can get the opposite. I worked at startups where you're very much compensated in stock options, and you're making not much more than your PhD. So that's a really hard question to kind of answer in what your set is. I think my only kind of recommendation is to, if you're going to go small companies, consider the whole package. It's not just salary. It's startup, it's learning experiences, and it's getting out of academia and into industry. So there's some compensation, that it's a more than just a fine salary. I don't have a number that I can really provide though off the top of my head.
Yeah, I agree. There's no magic number. You also have to consider where you're working. I moved from Montreal to Toronto, so I expected a higher salary in Toronto because my rent's super high compared to if I had stayed in Montreal and worked there. I think the other thing to consider is it still is your first job out of academia. I mean, PhD was work, believe me, I know, but don't expect the moon, I would say, and always consider this is your starting point. So whatever you accept at the beginning, there's opportunities for raises, there's opportunities to leave somewhere else and earn a little bit more once you have that experience. So I think just being a little bit realistic off the bat, but again, there's no specific number I can give. but know your worth as well. So.
Okay, so my first job after my PhD, I worked as a reporter in London. So that sounds exciting, I think, as a journalist. And I was kind of like living the dream in some sense, but that was very poorly paid. So I was, considering I'd moved down to London, I mean, I had much, much less money than I did during my PhD, and it was actually a huge source of stress. But I think that's the reality. I mean, I was lucky because working as a journalist, the fact that I had a job, a steady job, a full-time job was already something really good. And so that's, kind of the reality for that industry. After that, I moved into a nonprofit policy consultancy. And so that, that had a lot of benefits, but that was also not super well paid. I was basically had a postdoc salary, the equivalent of postdoc salary for people in the area. So.
I think for me, it's an easier question because all public service job salaries are online. So technically, you just have to know the how they call it, regulatory affairs officers, SG. You have biologists, BI3, BI2. So if you go to the public, the website, any position you can, any position, the salary ranges are there for the public to see. So there's not much. Research scientists also have their own different categories. So it's the information is available. And one thing I could have added also is that there are some regulatory, if you are really interested in regulatory affairs, there are some courses at University de Montreal, Seneca College, and I think Humber in Toronto, that some of those those courses have, they offer internships through the public service and other companies. So if you're interested in those, I've seen people, I think we have interviewed somebody from PhD in McGill who did finishing the PhD, started a postdoc, but decided to go to Seneca to do that course. So I think it's 1 year. And later on, when you do those courses, you easily get like a transition because some of them, they have internships within the government. So it's an easier way to staff when, if you are interested in regulatory affairs.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Sure. I just had one more comment on the salary thing. So you can find online to get your kind of idea of what your salary range is, and don't be afraid to fight a little bit for your first salary. Like when I got my first salary, it wasn't very great, and I was like, well, I'm out of academia, great, who cares, and didn't really think about it. And then, after I was at the company for a couple of years, I had to go back and fight for what I thought was my worth. So, we're not saying don't fight for what you're worth. So always make sure that, if you're at the stage where you're negotiating salary, at least ask for something. Maybe not in the government, but in industry, ask for something higher. And your worst case, they say no, but they're not going to turn you down at that stage.
Total. Yeah, thank you. Well, more questions are coming. Where would you recommend looking for jobs in your industry? And are online job posting world when it's true?
So I can talk a little bit about from the industry side, and this is something that I think everyone needs to be doing right now, wherever you are during your PhD, is you need to start paying attention to where the jobs are going to be coming from in your industry. So you're not going to go Indeed.ca and find great scientist jobs or positions. Sometimes you will, but in generally, it's going to be on the individual websites of the biotech companies and the small companies that you're paying attention to. So you need to have a list of companies paying attention to their career sites. You need to also find the kind of pan organizations. So for in BC, there's called BC Life Sciences, where all of life science companies are in. So you need to find your area that you want to focus on, find the companies in that area, and start looking at their websites for when things start refreshing. You start this early so that, when something pops up, you're not just, today only applying to jobs, it's something that's coming up over time. The other thing I would pay attention to, and those would be the kind of the posted jobs. The other thing I think you really need to pay attention to is big news driving events for, especially if you're trying to stay in Canada, for biotech and biopharma and all these kind of companies. Apply as soon as you hear big news. You need to be on Fierce Biotech, once a week, looking at the big companies. That's a website for biotech news. You need to be on those websites looking for who just raised a big Series A. So for example, if you live in Vancouver, Notch just launched a 85 million Series A last week. They are going to be hiring 100 people this year, I guarantee. There's nothing on their website. So you apply to that job right now, get in. Same thing, if a company's just gone IPO, maybe they've got a Health Canada approval, something like that, where they've got these big driver events that you're seeing in the news. If you're first there, you send them an email being like, look, just saw you guys got 85 million Series A, congratulations. I want to work for you guys. Here's my CV. Can we talk? That's the other approach I would recommend for people beyond just finding the websites and finding openings.
So I'm very embarrassed to say that I don't have much advice on that, because I really lucked out with my first job, which led to a different position with the same company. I've not been in the workforce that long, but one thing I can say is not all jobs are posted. Mine never was. And networking, as much as I hated that word when I was in grad school, is a thing that you should try and work on. It was very hard for me, but also tell everyone that you're looking. For me, my job came from a family friend that I've known since I was born. He went to school with my parents. He knew I was graduating. He's like, Laura, send me your CV. I'll see what I can do to help. I thought he was going to proofread it. He sent it out to all of his contacts, one of which was the CEO of my current company, who, when one of their employees was like, we need to hire a science person to do this job, he pulled my resume out of his bottom drawer and said, look at this girl. I got an email, I got a call, I got a job. Not how I expected to get a job. So you don't know who's going to know someone who's going to know someone that might have something that would work for you. So tell everyone you're looking and kind of what you're looking for. And other than, of course, doing your search with the websites like Mark said, and LinkedIn is very useful too. So.
Yeah, I think that's all good advice. I don't have too much to add. I could say that the first job that I got was I went to some sort of a small conference. I was in Scotland, and there was someone there who worked at the place that I ended up going to work. I was working on a student science magazine at the time, and I think I showed him the magazine or something like that. And he was interested in it, and we sort of talked a little bit. And I ended up, he said, oh, we have some jobs. We're going to be hiring soon. You could come check it out, something like that. So I ended up going into that role. And then the other two jobs, the next one I got because I was, or I found out about because I was, it was the kind of thing, this was the policy consultancy. I didn't actually know that kind of work existed until I did the reporting job. And then I sometimes was reporting on reports that this policy consultancy had produced. And so then I found out that they were there, and I thought, oh, that sounds like interesting work. And I saw that they were hiring at some point and went into that. And then the job I have now, I simply found on an online job listing website. So.
For me, I think it's very, the public service, it's that website for the public service, which I can share. It's very, that's where nearly all the jobs are listed. Sometimes some groups list, for example, there were some jobs, let me say in compliance now, and some people can list it up on LinkedIn. You can see some there. And for public service, it's mostly that website. And for those who plan to go to a postdoc, for me, I was contacting many companies, mostly during conferences. During the postdoc, during the PhD, you happen to attend many conferences. I know now with the COVID is different, but then we used to attend conferences, and you go via poster, you have all those skills from different companies, Bristol Myers Squibb, Pfizer, and all those. They are always advertising there. And then I think they used to have this career fair that McGill used to have, where I remember those career days. I remember sending friends there. I mean, I had friends who were not really in McGill, and they were interested, and they would come. It was quite interesting that students go there, and you actually had some contacts through those career days, and I think they actually help.
Actually, Michel, there is a follow-up question for you. What do you think was in your CV that stand out that get you selected for the job?
I think what was in my CV that got me, I think, selected was more about my publications, because I before starting my PhD, I had worked for I stayed in the same field. So since Belgium to McGill, to the Jewish hospital, to McGill, I stayed in the same field. So I had some track record of some publications that I had, which I could include in my CV to show that I had evaluated something. I had done some publication. I think those helped. The first job I had was not, they didn't really need a PhD per se, but you could, depending on how you responded to the questions that we ask you, you have to show that they want to see specific skills. They want to show example what you did. So the PhD is an asset, but it's not the main determining factor for many of those entry-level positions. As I think Catie mentioned before, you working as a tech. When I arrived Canada many years ago, I remember writing to the professor that my idea was to do a PhD. I really wanted to do a PhD. But when I arrived Montreal the first day, I remember going to his office and he asked me, "Oh, a technician just left for Florida. The only position I have is a technician. What do you think?" For me, I just grabbed the position. I was entering Canada. It was like 2 weeks after entering Canada from Belgium. And that was just one of the best things that happened to me.
So I think we are close to the end of the session, but there's just one quick question in terms of to what degree does the subject matter of your PhD and how common is it to move between fields in the industry?
You know, I think there's ability to move. You know, I did my PhD in genetics, and I ended up doing cancer drug development. So you can definitely move. If you're trying to do something completely separately, you know, it's going to take a little bit more than just, you know, I want to move in a new field. You know, maybe, you know, if you're talking, maybe you need to do some courses in that area or do a side project or something. So yes, you can move, and you can move kind of within the same concepts. Like I'm still preclinical drug development, just a different area of preclinical development. So yes, try to move. And I think that's one thing that, you know, consider kind of tangential approaches. So, you know, if you want to do something beyond your basic science, you can take your basic science, and it's going to be the same kind of area, but maybe you can apply that to clinic, or maybe you can apply that for manufacturing, or apply that to business development. So yeah, I think you can move. That's kind of my idea.
I don't know how common it is, but I definitely have moved quite a bit from my PhD subject matter. I did preclinical mouse models of breast cancer. I now work in the clinic in wound care and microbiology. So, I mean, yes, it's still science, it's still, you know, a disease, but it has been quite a shift. But I didn't get there all in one go. It took a couple steps. I think in my experience, startups give you a little bit more of that flexibility if you do want to move around. So if you can get the foot in the door and prove yourself to be a good worker, to be flexible, to be competent, competence, like my favorite word, then you might have more of an opportunity to see some of the other sides. When I started with my company, I was still in the mouse room. I was doing pig models. I was in the lab, but I reached out to the clinical team because I was more interested in that. I talked to the regulatory guy because I was interested in that. They liked me and were willing to move me into a place where now, as much as I sometimes miss the bench, I definitely don't have to work at it.
So I can't comment on the industry side, of course, but in terms of, I think the first part of the question was about how important is the topic, or does that sort of make a difference later on? And I would say no. Certainly the detailed sort of in-depth stuff that I did has been quite irrelevant ever since, you know, I defended my thesis and that was the end of it. But it was really the exposure to other things that was useful. So, like this weekly seminar we had where we had to read papers outside our field in the physiology department, that was actually really useful, having to do that. And just also the experience of being in the research environment ended up being quite useful for me as I went on. So I wrote about people who were in research, and I studied how research works and how research funding works. And so having actually been through the system in 2 countries in my case was quite useful for having that kind of understanding of what I was doing.
For me, the topic I did was actually not very relevant to my first job, because I was in core drug resistance HIV research. But when I came into the government, my first job was more regulatory review. We're trying to, when companies filing drug submissions, we had to make sure that the information was okay. And a year after that, I moved to a position as a drug evaluator for veterinary drugs. So that in that case, it was my undergrad and my first master's in microbiology that actually helped me, because we're looking at ensuring that the drugs that we're giving to animals, food-producing animals, will not lead to drug resistance to humans when they consume some of these products. But I later on moved to non-prescription drugs, where we're evaluating new non-prescription drugs for humans. So it's kind of applied science. It was not really exactly related to my topic, but generally a clinical trial is a clinical trial. So I think if you have done a PhD and you have done a clinical trial, all those examples, you should be able to apply that whether you're working in a vaccine group that they are doing approval for new vaccines in Canada. You can work in a bureau that is doing approval of antiviral drugs. You can work for non-prescription drugs or even cancer drugs. So just the background that you have done a PhD, there is no school that they teach people how to do review. So your PhD is enough for you to do any of those things. And so it's easy for you to transition within the public service. And as you move higher, get into more managerial roles, you do less of technical work. So you do more looking at as a manager, you look at reviews that are already done to make an informed decision how those drugs were approved. So in terms of transition, it's possible to transition, and you just have to keep on looking and seeing the options that are available. And for me in particular, I think going back to virology only came back during COVID, when it was the first time I was actually using my PhD because after many years of doing it. It's been 11 years now, so it was my first time to actually do something on virology, which was very exciting because I understood the virus itself. I knew what was happening, and it was quite exciting to go back to looking at those things again.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And sorry we could not get to all the questions, but I think we are just right in time. Mari?
Yes, thank you so much to all the panelists, and thank you so much, Renzo, for asking all these wonderful questions, very important questions. I think all of these matters are what people are really struggling with when doing their PhD. So thank you all for your insights. I think we got some fabulous insights from you today. I invite all the people present, if you didn't have time to ask your question, you can connect with us. And also, if you want to attend any future event of the TRaCE McGill project, please kind of get in contact with us. So thank you again all for being here today, and I wish you all a very wonderful weekend and maybe winter break also. So thank you all.